There are places where everyone knows everyone, towns where people wave as they pass each other on the street, where the biggest news is usually a high school football game, a church fundraiser, or a family opening a new business. Cotton Plant, Arkansas was one of those places. A quiet community of just a few hundred residents, surrounded by farmland, highways, and generations of families who had spent their entire lives there. Violent crime wasn't something people expected to wake up to, but in the early hours of that day, everything changed. One person was dead. Another was fighting for life. And before sunrise, investigators would find themselves trying to answer a question that still echoes through the community. What happened inside Cotton Plant? Police arrived to a chaotic scene. A man later identified as Omari Chapple had suffered fatal gunshot wounds. Nearby, Annisia Atkins had also been shot. Unlike Chapple, she was still alive. Emergency responders rushed to save her. As she was transported for medical treatment in critical condition, officers began securing the scene. The Arkansas State Police would soon be called in to help investigate. For a town that rarely found itself in statewide headlines, this case would quickly become the focus of intense attention. But almost immediately, there was another mystery. Authorities released very little information. No detailed timeline, no explanation of what led to the shooting, no public discussion of a motive. Only a growing list of unanswered questions. Tonight, we're examining what investigators have confirmed, what remains unknown, and why cases like this remind us how quickly tragedy can strike, even in the quietest communities. Every homicide investigation begins with the same goal: separate fact from rumor, evidence from assumption, truth from speculation. In the hours after a violent crime, information is often incomplete. Witnesses may still be speaking with investigators. Forensic teams are documenting the scene. Family members are receiving devastating news. Detectives are careful about what they release publicly, because every detail can influence the investigation. The Cotton Plant shooting was no different. While social media quickly filled with theories and unverified claims, investigators focused on evidence. That distinction matters. In this documentary, we'll follow only the information that has been publicly confirmed while exploring how investigators approach a case when answers are still emerging. Because sometimes, the silence surrounding a case can be just as revealing as the facts themselves. Cotton Plant isn't a place many Americans could point to on a map. Located in eastern Arkansas, the town sits in Woodruff County. For generations, agriculture has shaped both its economy and identity. Cotton fields stretch across the surrounding landscape, giving the town its historic name. Life moves differently here. Traffic is light. Neighbors know one another. Families often remain in the area for decades. Like many small rural communities across America, Cotton Plant has experienced economic challenges over the years. Population numbers have gradually declined. Businesses have closed. Young adults often leave in search of greater opportunities elsewhere. Yet those who remain speak about something larger cities struggle to maintain: community. People recognize each other's vehicles. Churches remain central gathering places. Local schools become the heart of town life. That doesn't mean crime never happens. No community is completely immune. But shootings that leave one person dead and another critically injured are not ordinary events. When something like this occurs, it affects everyone. Residents begin asking questions. Parents worry. Rumors spread quickly. And investigators face enormous pressure to find answers. The first emergency calls transformed an ordinary day into an active homicide investigation. Dispatchers gathered the initial information. Law enforcement officers headed toward the reported location. Emergency medical personnel followed. Whenever officers respond to reports of gunfire, they prepare for uncertainty. They don't know whether the suspect is still nearby. They don't know how many victims there are. They don't know whether the danger has ended. Every second matters. Upon arrival, first responders encountered two shooting victims. One was Omari Chapple. The injuries he had suffered proved fatal. Nearby was Annisia Atkins. Despite severe injuries, she was alive. Medical personnel immediately began life-saving efforts before transporting her for emergency treatment. The focus then shifted, saving lives, securing the crime scene, protecting evidence, finding witnesses, determining whether a suspect remained at large. Every homicide scene tells a story, but only if investigators can preserve it before it's disturbed. That's why officers establish crime scene perimeters, limit access, photograph everything, document every piece of evidence exactly where it is found. Even something as small as a shell casing, a footprint, or a tire mark could later become crucial evidence. Television often portrays crime scenes as fast-moving investigations where detectives immediately solve mysteries. Reality is far slower. Forensic investigators work methodically. Every photograph, every measurement, every recovered item, every observation, everything must be documented, because investigators only get one opportunity to process the scene correctly. If evidence is overlooked, it may never be recovered. If documentation is incomplete, defense attorneys can later challenge investigative findings. In cases involving firearms, investigators commonly search for spent cartridge casings, bullet fragments, damaged property, blood evidence, surveillance footage, and anything capable of reconstructing what happened. Even the positions of vehicles can become important. Investigators also begin establishing timelines. Who called first? Who arrived first? Who left before police arrived? Who heard gunshots? Who may have seen someone running away? Each answer becomes another piece of an enormous puzzle. As the seriousness of the incident became clear, assistance was requested from the Arkansas State Police. That decision is common in major violent crime investigations, particularly within smaller jurisdictions where additional investigative resources are valuable. State investigators bring specialized experience in homicide investigations, forensic coordination, evidence analysis, and witness interviews. From that moment forward, the investigation expanded. Local officers continued supporting the case. State investigators began coordinating interviews. Forensic specialists examined physical evidence. Medical examiners worked to determine the precise cause and manner of Omari Chapple's death. Meanwhile, doctors fought to save Annisia Atkins. Her condition meant investigators hoped she might eventually be able to provide information about what happened, if and when her medical condition allowed. At that stage, nearly every important question remained unanswered. Who fired the shots? Why? Did the victims know the shooter? Was this a targeted attack? Or did events unfold unexpectedly? Authorities weren't prepared to answer those questions publicly, and responsible investigators rarely rush conclusions before the evidence has been thoroughly examined. For detectives, the earliest hours after a homicide are often the most demanding. Evidence must be preserved. Witnesses must be interviewed before memories fade. Families must be notified. Media inquiries begin almost immediately. Community pressure grows. Every decision matters. Release too much information, and investigators risk compromising the case. Release too little, and rumors begin filling the void. The cotton plant investigation entered exactly that difficult stage. Officials confirmed a death. They confirmed another victim remained hospitalized. They confirmed the Arkansas State Police were investigating. Beyond that, silence. For grieving families, silence can feel unbearable. For investigators, it can be necessary, because justice isn't built on assumptions. It's built on evidence. And in Cotton Plant, the evidence was only beginning to reveal its story. The first question every detective asks when investigators arrive at a homicide scene, the first mystery isn't always who committed the crime. It's often something even more fundamental. What exactly happened? That may sound like a simple question, but crime scenes rarely tell a complete story on their own. A body can reveal injuries, a firearm can reveal caliber, shell casings can indicate how many rounds were fired, but none of those pieces, by themselves, explain why the violence happened, or what unfolded in the minutes leading up to it. In Cotton Plant, Investigators were working with two victims. One had died. The other had survived, but was critically injured. That changed the nature of the investigation. A surviving victim can become one of the most important sources of evidence, but only if they are medically stable enough to speak, and only after investigators are confident any statement can be taken without interfering with medical care. At the same time, detectives had to begin building a timeline without relying on assumptions. Every minute mattered. One of the most difficult parts of any homicide investigation comes after the crime scene has been secured. Investigators begin learning about the victim, not simply as a name in a report, but as a person. Who were they? Where had they been that day? Who had they spoken to? What plans had they made? Who expected to hear from them later that evening? In the days following the shooting, authorities publicly identified the man who had been killed as Omari Chapple. Beyond confirming his identity, officials released very little personal information. That isn't unusual. Families are often still grieving. Detectives are still conducting interviews, and investigators may deliberately withhold certain details while they determine whether those details have investigative value. For loved ones, however, the headlines tell only part of the story. Behind every homicide investigation is a family forced to absorb unimaginable news. A phone call, a knock at the door, a moment that permanently divides life into before and after. For them, Omari Chapple wasn't simply the victim in a news report. He was someone whose absence would be felt long after investigators packed away the evidence markers and crime scene tape. The tragedy did not end with Omari Chapple. Authorities also confirmed that Annisia Atkins had suffered gunshot wounds and was transported for emergency medical treatment in critical condition. For investigators, her survival introduced both hope and uncertainty. Hope, because she might eventually be able to describe what happened. Uncertainty, because no one could predict how quickly, or even whether, she would recover enough to assist the investigation. Medical priorities always come first. Doctors focus on saving lives. Detectives wait. Only after physicians determine that a patient is medically stable can investigators begin asking questions. Even then, interviews are handled carefully. Trauma affects memory. Pain medication can affect recall. Investigators understand that accuracy matters more than speed. One interview conducted too early can create confusion instead of clarity. Every investigation begins to revolve around time, not days, not hours, sometimes only minutes. Detectives ask dozens of seemingly ordinary questions. When were the victims last seen alive? Who saw them? Did anyone hear gunshots? Was there an argument beforehand? Did neighbors notice unfamiliar vehicles? Were there surveillance cameras nearby? Did anyone leave suddenly after the shooting? Individually, each answer may appear insignificant. Together, they become the framework of the investigation. Modern detectives rarely rely on eyewitness testimony alone. They compare witness statements against physical evidence, phone records, location data, security cameras, digital communications, vehicle movements. Even if no one directly witnessed the shooting, technology can sometimes reveal who entered or left an area before and after the crime. In rural communities, where surveillance cameras may be less common than in large cities, investigators often depend even more heavily on interviews, forensic evidence, and careful reconstruction of the scene. Television often shows detectives solving murders through dramatic interrogations. Reality is quieter, more methodical. Sometimes the most important witness is the evidence itself. Firearms leave signatures. Bullets can sometimes be matched to a specific weapon through microscopic markings. Shell casings may reveal how many shots were fired, and, in some circumstances, help determine the shooter's position. Bloodstain patterns can assist investigators in reconstructing movement during the incident. Medical examinations can help establish the trajectory of bullets and the nature of injuries. Every piece contributes to understanding what happened. None tells the entire story on its own. This is why homicide investigations often take weeks or months. Detectives are not simply collecting evidence, They are testing theories against that evidence. If a theory doesn't match the physical facts, it is discarded. Good investigators don't build cases around assumptions. They build them around proof. As news of the shooting spread, so did speculation. In nearly every high-profile case, there comes a moment when the public begins demanding answers. Who did it? Why haven't there been arrests? What are investigators waiting for? These questions are understandable, but investigators often know more than they can responsibly disclose. Prematurely revealing evidence may alert a suspect. Publicly discussing witness statements can influence future testimony. Even confirming specific investigative theories too early may compromise a prosecution later. Silence, while frustrating, is sometimes a deliberate investigative strategy. The absence of public updates does not necessarily mean the investigation has stalled. Often, it means detectives are working behind the scenes, reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, consulting forensic experts, and carefully documenting every finding. The goal is not simply to make an arrest. The goal is to build a case that can withstand scrutiny in court. In a small town like Cotton Plant, violent crime has a way of reshaping daily life. People begin locking doors they once left unlocked. Conversations at grocery stores shift from everyday routines to unanswered questions. Parents become more cautious. Neighbors look out for one another a little more closely. For some, the uncertainty is the hardest part. Without clear answers, rumors often fill the gaps. One person says they heard an argument. Another claims someone saw a suspicious vehicle. Soon, speculation spreads faster than verified information. Investigators know this pattern well. That's why they urge anyone with first-hand knowledge, not rumors, to come forward. Reliable information can move an investigation forward. False information can send it in the wrong direction. A forensic report, a timeline that finally begins to make sense. These milestones rarely make headlines, but they often determine whether justice is ultimately achieved. For the family of Omari Chapple, every passing day without definitive answers could feel like another day of uncertainty. For Annisia Atkins, recovery itself remained the immediate priority, and for investigators, the work continued, quietly, carefully, and often away from public view. Because in homicide investigations, patience is not the opposite of urgency. It is part of the process. By the time the flashing emergency lights faded from the streets of Cotton Plant, another phase of the investigation had already begun. For the public, the crime scene was over. For detectives, it was only the beginning. Every homicide leaves behind two stories. The first is visible: police vehicles, crime scene tape, news cameras. The second story is invisible. It exists inside evidence bags, forensic laboratories, interview rooms, and thousands of pages of investigative notes. That second story is the one detectives spend weeks, or sometimes months, trying to piece together. Because unlike television dramas, real investigations rarely unfold in dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, they move forward, one fact at a time, one phone call, one witness, one forensic report, one confirmed detail. Every piece either strengthens a theory or forces investigators to abandon it. The goal isn't to prove an assumption, it's to discover the truth. When a homicide occurs in a smaller Arkansas community, local agencies often request assistance from the Arkansas State Police. That doesn't mean local officers have failed. It means additional resources are needed. State investigators bring specialized experience in homicide investigations, digital evidence, forensic coordination, and interview techniques. In complex cases, that experience can be invaluable. Investigators divide responsibilities. Some focus on processing evidence. Others begin interviewing witnesses. Others review surveillance footage. Others examine phone records or vehicle movements. Every team works toward the same objective: reconstructing the events that led to the shooting. In the Cotton Plant investigation, authorities confirmed that Arkansas State Police were assisting. Beyond that, investigators released very few specifics publicly. That restraint is common. The strongest criminal cases are often built quietly. One of the first things detectives attempt to establish is the victim's final known movements. Where were they earlier that day? Who were they with? Did they make any phone calls? Send any messages? Meet anyone unexpectedly? Small details can become significant. A receipt, a text message, a missed phone call, a gas station surveillance camera. Each may place someone at a specific location and time. Modern homicide investigations rely heavily on digital evidence. Even in rural communities, people carry smartphones. Phones record far more than conversations. They can contain photographs, messages, GPS information, and timestamps that help investigators understand where someone traveled before a crime occurred. If investigators obtain the necessary legal authority, that digital trail can become an important part of the investigation. But digital evidence doesn't replace traditional police work. It complements it. Every digital clue must be compared against witness statements and physical evidence. Only when multiple sources point in the same direction does a reliable picture begin to emerge. Contrary to popular belief, not every witness actually sees the crime. Some hear voices. Others notice a vehicle. Someone else remembers hearing gunshots. Another person recalls an unusual sound moments before. Individually, these observations may seem insignificant. Together, they can become the framework of an investigation. Detectives often interview dozens of people, sometimes hundreds, not because they expect every person to know what happened, but because every witness observes something different. Two people standing on the same street can remember completely different details. One notices clothing, another notices a vehicle, another remembers the direction someone ran. Investigators compare every statement. Where accounts agree, confidence increases. Where they differ, detectives ask why. Human memory is imperfect. Trauma complicates it even further. That's why physical evidence remains so important. Evidence doesn't forget. Unlike many homicide investigations, this case involved a second victim. Annisia Atkins survived the shooting, although authorities initially reported she was in critical condition. Her recovery became important for two reasons. The first was obvious. Family members hoped she would survive. Doctors worked to stabilize her injuries. Medical staff focused entirely on saving her life. The second reason involved the investigation. If she became medically able to speak with detectives, she might provide information unavailable from any other source. Investigators never assume a surviving victim knows everything. Traumatic events happen quickly. People focus on survival. Memories may be incomplete. Still, even small details can help confirm timelines or identify inconsistencies. Whether those interviews occurred, what was discussed, or how they affected the investigation has not been publicly disclosed, and unless investigators release that information in court or official statements, it remains unknown. In nearly every major investigation, social media becomes a second crime scene. Within hours, names begin circulating. Unverified screenshots appear online. People claim to know the motive. Others insist they know the suspect. Some posts are honest misunderstandings. Others are deliberate misinformation. For investigators, rumors create real problems. False information can overwhelm tip lines. Witnesses may begin repeating details they actually learned online instead of what they personally observed. Potential jurors may form opinions before charges are even filed. This is why detectives consistently encourage the public to rely on official information. The internet moves quickly. Evidence moves carefully. The two rarely travel at the same speed. Many people expect arrests within hours. Sometimes that happens. When investigators identify a suspect immediately and have sufficient evidence, arrests can occur very quickly. Other times, detectives must proceed cautiously. They may know who they're interested in speaking with, but knowing is not proving. In a courtroom, suspicion is not enough. Every element of a criminal case must be supported by admissible evidence. Investigators know that rushing an arrest without a solid case can jeopardize a prosecution later. That's why patience matters. Not because detectives are moving slowly, because they are moving deliberately. Every search warrant, every forensic report, every interview, every laboratory result, each one must withstand scrutiny from defense attorneys, judges, and juries. The objective isn't simply an arrest. It's a conviction supported by evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. As the days passed, the people of Cotton Plant continued with their routines. Schools opened, businesses operated, families gathered. Yet something had changed. Violence has a way of altering how a community sees itself. Residents begin asking questions they never imagined asking. Could this happen again? Was the shooting random? Was anyone else in danger? Those questions matter, not only because they affect public confidence, but because they remind investigators that every unresolved homicide has consequences extending far beyond the victims themselves. For the family of Omari Chapple, the investigation represented hope. Hope that someone would eventually explain what happened. Hope that accountability would follow. Hope that one day, the unanswered questions would finally receive answers grounded in evidence rather than speculation. In every homicide investigation, there comes a moment when the headlines fade. News crews leave. Social media moves on. But investigators remain. Families continue grieving, and the search for truth continues long after public attention has shifted elsewhere. The story of Omari Chapple is not only about one tragic shooting, it is also about the painstaking work required to transform scattered pieces of evidence into a clear, reliable account of what happened. Whether that process takes weeks, months, or longer, the principle remains the same. Justice is strongest when it is built on facts. Not assumptions, not rumors. Every homicide investigation reaches a point where the flashing lights disappear. The yellow crime scene tape is taken down. News crews move on to the next story. Social media finds a new headline. But for the families left behind, life doesn't simply return to normal. It never does. For the loved ones of Omari Chapple, the loss is measured not in headlines, but in birthdays that will never be celebrated together, holidays with an empty chair at the table, and everyday moments that now carry the weight of absence. For Annisia Atkins, the shooting marked a life-changing event. While authorities initially reported that she was critically injured, the long-term impact of such violence extends far beyond the emergency room. Recovery from a traumatic event can involve not only physical healing, but emotional and psychological challenges that are often invisible to the public. For the people of Cotton Plant, the shooting became a reminder that no community, no matter how small or close-knit, is completely untouched by violence. Communities like this are often defined by familiarity. Neighbors know each other's names. Families have lived side by side for generations. When violence enters that kind of environment, it doesn't affect just one household. It sends shockwaves through an entire town. In the weeks that follow, questions often linger. What happened? Why did it happen? Could it have been prevented? Those are questions that investigators work to answer through evidence, not assumptions. And that distinction matters. In today's world, rumors can travel across the internet within minutes. Names can be shared before they're verified. Motives can be invented before investigators have finished processing a crime scene. But justice doesn't move at the speed of social media. It moves at the pace of evidence. Every interview must be documented. Every forensic report must be examined. Every lead must be tested. Sometimes those efforts produce quick answers. Sometimes they take months. And sometimes they take even longer. At the time this documentary was written, authorities had confirmed the shooting, identified the victims, and announced that the Arkansas State Police were leading the investigation. Beyond those verified facts, many details had not been released publicly. That means there are still unanswered questions. And until investigators provide additional information through official statements or court proceedings, those questions remain exactly that, unanswered. Perhaps one day, the full story will be told in a courtroom. Perhaps new evidence will emerge. Perhaps the families involved will finally receive the clarity they have been waiting for. Until then, the most responsible approach is to separate fact from speculation and allow the investigation to follow its course. Because every victim deserves the truth, every family deserves answers, and every community deserves justice that is built on evidence, not rumor. If this case has taught us anything, it is that tragedy can arrive without warning, even in the quietest places. The search for justice doesn't end when the cameras stop recording. For investigators, it continues. For families, it continues. And for a small Arkansas town, forever changed by one violent day, it continues. Thank you for watching. If you appreciate factual, respectful, and in-depth true crime documentaries that focus on verified information rather than speculation, consider subscribing to the channel. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, but please remember that this is an active real-world case. Be respectful to those affected, avoid spreading unverified claims, and rely on official information as new developments emerge. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and remember, behind every case file is a human story that deserves to be told with care.